Hi, I'm Andrew Merryweather. I am VP of User Experience at Elsevier. And today I'm going to be talking with you about designing for enterprise software. And I'd like to say thanks to Invika for having me along. Let's launch in. So what is enterprise software? Just to make sure that we're on the same page. Well, for me, in the past 10 years, I've been working as a designer or leading designers at a couple of large companies, both FTSE 100 companies, Thomson Reuters and Elsevier. And at TR, we were making software for financial professionals, traders, investment professionals. At Elsevier, we're making tools for academics, universities, delivering a suite of products into a really complicated ecosystem of research institutions, researchers, and organizations that fund research. And the essence of that is providing a workhorse tool for the core working tasks of a professional's day. And these are quite niche audiences. The tasks they're undertaking are often quite complex, and they are critical to the success of their organization. So we need to make sure they're getting the right information at the right time. And now I want to launch into a catchily named segment called Things I Hear Occasionally. So this talk, it's not a super formal takeaway listicle type of talk. It's more a chat about things that I thought about when I was invited to come and present on this subject. And I just hope to give a sense of what it means to design enterprise software and what it means to be a designer or a design leader in an enterprise. This is the way we're going to do it. Things I hear occasionally. Number one, user experience work is the same in B2B enterprise as in B2C consumer. And it's not really a fair one to start with, because most folks would immediately say, you know, that actually they would acknowledge that it's quite different. But there are important differences that it's worth teasing out, and there are some special fascinations with working in an enterprise on enterprise software for professionals. And there are some challenges as well that are some people love and some don't so much. It's no more difficult than working on a consumer app, but it's certainly different. The first thing which kind of hits you in the face when you walk into a large organization making this kind of software is the complexity of it. And I think one of the challenges there is that a lot of designers coming into that environment underestimate the ramp-up time, even though they're confronted by that complexity. And I know that I had that experience. So the very first job that I took on when I got into Thomson Reuters was to work on this product here, a map, which shows all of the commodities that are traded around the world, and many of them in real time, such as this is a map showing vessels in the Gulf of Mexico, which are live tracked. And commodities traders are interested in the status of everything and where everything is. Every vessel that's carrying goods they're interested in, every oil refinery, mines. And when I first landed in front of this problem, I approached it as a typical design problem. Of course, I did my due diligence in terms of getting to understand the user space. And I immediately started addressing some issues with workflow and UI. There's some real challenges around designing for maps with the icons that stand out on backgrounds and so on. And I got into that kind of detail. But I sort of realized after 3 months or so that I was still on the outside of the real conversation about how to make this better. And it wasn't until about 6 months into the job that I became a part of that conversation with the product manager, with the lead tech folks, and was able to understand some of the deeper issues that created real challenges in designing on top of this complex set of data. That was 6 months of work, and the 6 or 8 months that followed that ramp up time were probably the most fulfilling of my career as a practicing designer. The payoff was tremendous, but that initial period, I look back on the work I did in that first 3 or 4 months, and it felt very, very superficial once I had that perspective. So give yourself time, and the company hopefully invests in that time for people to ramp up onto these complex problems. Something else that hits after a while is what could be called the simplicity trap. So on the left, you've got the cockpit of a space shuttle. I think it's Columbia. And anyone who's seen one of my talks from way back 8, 9 years ago knows that I love a good space shuttle cockpit photo. It's an astonishing UI. And there is a real risk when we're approaching a UI like this, that we apply rules that maybe work in certain contexts around simplifying, don't work so well in others. So when you reduce the complexity, what occasionally happens is users who feel seriously disempowered. And that can happen for a couple of reasons. I mean, firstly, you don't want to remove power from their tools. These are, it's very difficult to downgrade features, and often not appropriate. They're undertaking difficult, complex tasks, and complex tasks need complicated tools. But there's another difficulty here, which is that professionals who might have spent 10 years mastering their domain want to feel like when they sit in front of a multi-trading screen setup, that they are masters of something that no one else can really understand. This is an emotional thing. I'm not criticizing it. It's a completely legitimate feeling. And when you replace this thing that they have learned and mastered over several years with a few buttons and a lot of white space, it can feel like you're taking something away. And maybe there's one other point to make about an interface like that one on the left, or like the trading screen that I showed earlier, which is that it's not necessarily a bad UI. If you look at the context of that shuttle, who are the users? It's maybe 10 people would ever have sat in that and used that UI out of a pool of maybe 20 who were trained. They would have had 4 years of training before they were sitting there and taking off in the shuttle. And a pretty good UI for that group might be one that puts all data and functionality visible and within arm's reach. If you've got the opportunity to train a team to get to that point, then that might be a good solution. Now, designing enterprise software, it's not that. You're not at that extreme, nowhere near. But you're certainly a little bit further down the continuum with a smaller group of folks who are going to spend time learning their craft. And that changes the parameters that you're designing by. And that's always worth bearing in mind. Another classic one, which I think is pretty well understood now, is just simply that when you're designing enterprise software, you're very often in a B2B situation, not a B2C situation. You're designing for a business to purchase tools for its members rather than selling directly to the users themselves. And that throws up some interesting challenges, and it's not always easy to resolve those two poles. We have to design for both. We're designing a product, and the product needs to be purchased, which means the people who are interested in purchasing it need to see that it's going to be valuable. It needs to be attractive to them. They need to understand the problems that it's solving for their own team members. And the users, of course, need to have a fantastic experience. They need to feel the value, and you don't want a situation where a company purchases and then 6 months later their own users are telling them they've made a mistake. but it can still be, even with a good understanding of that, it can still be quite a difficult task to get to grips with. If you look at working with universities, and I mean, imagine the challenge right now of running a successful research university in the current climate and what's happened this year. It's really tough. And within universities, they're not like a business. They're more like a federation of some central organization, some focused on running the operations of the university, and some, such as the librarians, who are critical to the successful running of a research university, looking at the knowledge system. And then all of the researchers and students, and many of the researchers see themselves as simply they're present at a university rather than seeing it as their company or organization in the way that we might see it, the businesses we work for. It's very complex trying to deliver something into that ecosystem that says this is going to help this system work more effectively, and to get consensus between the different buyers and the users. And that's something that the designer can't afford to be completely divorced from. They need to think about it, because it affects everything all the way through into the design of the product itself. Things I hear occasionally, number 2. Think like a startup and victory is ours. So again, I'm being slightly unfair here, because there are great things about startups, and some of the best projects I've worked on have been quite a lot like a startup. A designer, a developer, a product or business lead, just working together in a very agile way. But in a large enterprise, you make enterprise software. Do we want to run a large enterprise almost like a venture capital fund working with a collection of startups? I'm not so sure. It can tend to feel a little bit like this, a little bit like the Hunger Games. If an enterprise is setting itself up to work this way, then they're losing their home court advantage. And the advantage of being in a large enterprise is its size. You've got an incredible mass of people, perspectives, who are in a structure that helps them collaborate. You have a large investment in technology. You've got systems and platforms to build on, and you've got the scope to take on challenges that are much more wide-reaching, impactful and complex than smaller companies can deal with in one go. We're looking at changing entire systems and how they work, rather than simply building small products. Now, that doesn't mean that working agile or working lean is not important. Of course it is. You want teams to be nimble within that system, and all of these things come into play. And the more I go on in my career, the more I realize that these are really all the same thing, just expressed for product groups or development groups or designers. These approaches, of course, are important, but I think it's incumbent on the designer, and perhaps uniquely important for the designer in the role we often play, to always be prepared to put their head above the parapet and look around, get out of the silo, look across, think about what the business is trying to achieve, think about all the different products that are being developed on the platform or across the suite, and check that there is coherence in the right way, or that we're not missing opportunities for one design solution to solve a problem elsewhere. And I think I spent a year earlier in my career visiting a lot of corporations and looking at their agile setups. It was a fascinating time. And one of the great lessons there I got from a person at one of those organizations was always be the person who gets up and out of the squads, out of the daily flow, and looks around. And that's a key function for design to play in the enterprise. And it's the difference between an enterprise and a collection of startups. And there's no way that an enterprise can sustain the failure rate of a community of startups. It needs to take advantage of its size and connectivity. Things I hear occasionally, number 3. If only the business understood design, everything would be wonderful. I think this is, any designer has this kind of experience. It can come through particularly strongly sometimes in a large enterprise working on these big slow cycle software projects. I think the key here, this is Saran, who, if you didn't realize, has taken up residence at the top of the Shard in London after the Mordor gig went south. It's not about seeing the business as being in opposition to us. It's not. I'm not denying that sometimes the business might not fully understand the impact that design has. But the thing is that what pulls us into a trap with that assumption that the business doesn't understand is that, in fact, very often they do. Now, when I say the business, I mean the executive, the C-level folks, the VPs, the business leadership, the ones who are holding the purse strings and making the big decisions. And it's firstly, you don't necessarily want to be going into a meeting with the C-level folks with the thought in your mind that they don't understand what you do, because that's just going to get you off on the wrong foot. But in fact, they very probably will understand what you do to the extent that they need to understand any function in the business. So they won't understand the ins and outs of platform architecture. They won't necessarily understand the detailed ins and outs of what is happening within brand strategy on a particular campaign. But they will know what those things will do as a lever to pull to help them be more successful and help the business be more successful. And most executive groups these days have some understanding of how design is a lever to pull to help the success of the business. That is not the problem. I think sometimes the challenge is that we aren't prepared, or we don't take the opportunity to get into the focused gaze of that business decision-making group, that senior group. They are looking at us. They have a channel of sight, which is where they are focusing their attention, their investment. That's where the success is going to come from. And anything that happens outside that area of focus is much, much less chance of having an impact. And every time we kind of head towards that area and say, right, I want to do this thing, and we get rebuffed or seem to be misunderstood, and we step back and say, okay, if I only explain it better, I'll get in there. And then we do some work on the outside and try and push it in. It's very unlikely that that work is going to succeed. We need to get right in. And to do that, you need to work really, really hard to empathize and understand empathize with and understand the business leadership. What are the problems they're trying to solve? What are their challenges? And then you've got to go in and take the heat. It's hot in there being under the eye of Sauron, right? There's pressure, there's accountability. And you need to be prepared to take that on. And only once you've taken that on can you have a chance of changing things from the inside and creating a space where great design happens, which, as we all know, in the majority of cases, will help the business be more successful. The last thing that I hear occasionally: working as a designer in a large enterprise sucks. And okay, occasionally it does, right? And that's true of most places. But there are also wonderful things about being a designer in the enterprise. And I think I've already touched on some of those, how rewarding it is to be able to work on big problems with a large group of colleagues with an incredible range of skills. There's still a sense that somehow culturally or by feel there are, do you really want to be working in one of these huge corporations? And there are images we have in our minds. Now there are good techniques now that are well understood that help mitigate some of these challenges. And I've been a fan for a while of some of the principles set out in Peter Merholtz and Kristen Skinner's book. And there's a community of design leaders who have put a lot of thought now into how we make design work in the enterprise. And it is absolutely possible to create a good working practice. But still we have these images, and it's either this pristine dystopic future, which was expressed back in 85, or it's this kind of dystopic present. And I think we need to try and step away from those sorts of images, which certainly don't represent my experience of working in the enterprise, though occasionally it's taken work to avoid these things. So what does it feel like then? When it's going right, what does it feel like? Now I want to try now something which is in a way is a metaphor for the complexity of designing in the enterprise, which is attempting to show a video in a pre-recorded session that is now being broadcast to the conference. And if this works, well, we'll see. So when you look at this machine, if you look at it closely, it's got rough edges. There are rough human pieces to this. Some of the bits are kind of not holding together so well. And when it starts to operate, and the 2,000 marbles that turn this into a music machine start spinning around, and every now and again one of them bounces off onto the floor and so on. And yet, I look at this machine and I find it to be an extremely beautiful piece of design. And the feeling of trying to put something together with these apparently incompatible pieces and create something that has coherence, and then to see it play and produce an outcome for our customers that changes their lives, changes the way that they work, is incredibly rewarding. So I'll leave you with a minute of this.